My name is Jordan Werma. I am the host of this podcast, and I have a confession to make. Let's try to keep it between us, though, okay? I really don't want this to become public in any way. So I've said before that I want to focus on creativity in Connecticut. Heck, it was one of the founding principles of the show. Well, I may have just a little bit left the state for today's episode. That's right, today's episode was recorded in a distant, faraway place known as Rhode Island. I left the state, and I liked it. Now you have to deal with it too. Or not, I guess. You literally have all the say in that matter. So I spanned the distance to the magical, faraway place known as Westerly, Rhode Island, in order to meet up with author Michael R. McGuire. His roots actually do reach back into Connecticut. We discussed his writing. He's the author of a series of novels that touch on the Illuminati. Again, let's keep this a secret so it doesn't get back to them that we talked about them. Secrets may have been unearthed. Or not. I met with Michael on a Monday morning over a cup of coffee at Junk and Java, and to tell you honestly, there are many worse ways to start the week. It was really a great conversation over a great cup of joe, and I hope you enjoy it. If you are so inclined, I invite you to leave a rating or a review of the pod on a local iTunes or other podcast service, and send me a mail at tabletostage@gmail.com. I read them all. Every single one. It's exhausting, but worth it. Also, if you are interested in getting more involved in the show, or just in helping to keep it going, you can become a patron supporter by visiting patreon.com/tabletostage and signing on for as little as 25 cents per episode. 20 cents if there's a fifth Tuesday in the month. So go check it out. Not if you're driving. If you're driving, please wait until you've at least reached your destination. Then definitely go do all of those things. Also, because I do want to support creativity outside of this little endeavor, I'm going to start making some of my own recommendations from time to time. Today, I'll plug a couple of my favorite podcasts. First, Table to Stage, really just exceptional. Once you're caught up with that, here are some of my other favorites. Couch Grouches. They're vulgar, candid, and really nerdy. It's a fun listen, and they'll read just about anything you send them, which is entertaining in and of itself. Another one is Lexicon Valley. Linguist John McWhorter, who's been a favorite of mine for years now, talks about all things linguistic. So if you're curious about etymology, it's a must. And last one for today is Ologies. Allie Ward seeks out and interrogates, nicely, scientists from all kinds of different fields. I actually listen to a ton of podcasts, and if you'd like more recommendations, go ahead and ask. Email is a great way to get some of that information. The guest. Okay, so here's me and Michael R. McGuire from Junk and Java in Westerly, Rhode Island.
I'm from New London, Connecticut, originally.
Yeah.
I wasn't born there. I was born in Libya, of all places.
Really?
Yeah, my father was in the Air Force back in the 60s, and they were stationed in Italy, and that's where they sent the pregnant moms to have children.
Where in Italy?
Brindisi,
okay,
which is a small town in the heel of the boot.
Okay.
But I wasn't there long enough to really remember it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you remember Libya at all?
No, it was like a week when I was an infant. So
yeah. Oh, all right.
Yeah. So
no, I don't. Very short-lived.
Very short-lived. Yes.
Okay.
But So, but just those weird little facts. It's a strange place to have been born.
Yeah. No, that's the first time I've encountered that. That is interesting.
Yeah.
How did you end up in Connecticut?
My father's family worked at Electric Boat, and so he came to work at Electric Boat, and so we ended up in New London, and that's where I grew up.
Yeah. So, do you have any recollection of of Electric Boat or the sub bass or anything as a part of your childhood? Did that impact you at all?
It was always there.
Yeah.
It was the place where everyone worked back in the day. I'm sure it still is.
Yeah, it is, especially
biggest employer
for that
around.
corner of the state. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How did you first get into writing? I mean, you're pretty prolific these days.
Yeah.
I don't think that the New London area is particularly well known as a writer's haven necessarily.
It kind of actually is.
Oh, is it?
Because the Eugene O'Neill was his town, and so there's a lot of playwrights. People are inspired by the fact that the Eugene O'Neill Center is right there. So for many years there was a local playwrights festival that had lots of playwrights submitting to it.
Okay.
But I got into writing when I was very young. I'm talking like 8 years old. I was really into comic books, Marvel comic books and the superheroes, and I started writing and drawing my own, and I treated it like a job from a very early age. As a child, I had a small desk, and I would just produce them.
Really?
They were numbered. I copied the legal statement on the bottom of that's appeared on the first page. I was very, very serious about it.
Wow.
To the point where sometimes my mom in the summer would insist I get away from the desk and go outside and play.
Yeah. Drawing your own stuff too?
Drawing my own stuff, yeah.
What kind of characters?
They were all just superheroes, sort of, cheap knockoffs of what was being produced,
Yeah, so you were strictly a Marvel guy?
Marvel and DC when I was little, but as I got older, got more into Marvel than DC.
Yeah. Any writers or artists that were specifically influential to you?
Well, obviously Stan Lee, obviously.
Yeah.
Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were hugely influential. And as John Byrne was one of the greats in the 80s and 90s, and he was a writer and artist, and he did a lot of the X-Men. Chris Claremont wrote for the X-Men for a while, and they were big influences when I was younger.
Yeah. Do you have favorite characters from that time?
Not really.
No,
I liked them all. I wasn't like this is my guy.
Yeah. Okay. So how did you initially get into? Because you're writing novels, you're writing plays now.
Mm-hmm.
How did you initially get into that? Were you a heavy reader as a child?
I read more comic books for longer than I probably should have.
Oh, I'm still reading them.
Yeah.
So that's, whatever.
And I also was a Dungeons and Dragons player. It was the other thing that really influenced writing, because I was always the dungeon master, and that was having to come up with a new story every single week for very demanding and critical players who would tell you right away this stinks or and so having to entertain people week after week after week, or I felt the need, I had to do it.
How old were you when you started doing that?
13.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I got my first Dungeons and Dragons set for Christmas in 1980, and it was the same year I got my first video game set, Atari. The family got it. And, it was a life-changing event, both video games and and Dungeons and Dragons, and so I met some friends shortly thereafter who I'm still friends with today.
Sure.
And we started playing.
Are you still playing D&D at all?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Does any of that? Well, I'm sure it must at some level. How does your D&D experience impact the writing that you do now, or how has it influenced? Maybe.
Well, it's made me. I'm a fairly quick writer, because again you have to come up with something.
Oh yeah.
Week after week after week, and expecting something, and I'm mindful of what's going to entertain people. I've tried not to be the kind of writer who is self-indulgent. My number one goal in writing is this going to be fun to read? Is this going to be fun to see on stage? Not. If there's a message, it's subverted to the idea of entertainment. Okay. Entertainment is the first thing. Yeah. Even though my stuff is kind of weird and out there, it's not for everybody, but well, that's the number one goal.
How would you describe your writing style? Like if you're saying it's kind of weird and not for everybody.
I'd say it's dark, subversive, funny. Those are the things I sort of go for.
Okay. And where do you find the inspiration for the subject matter that you tackle?
Everywhere. It's just I could live for another 3 lifetimes and not write out every idea that I've had. It's
do you carry a notebook and write things down?
I don't. No, I should. I've always said that I should because I've lost so many ideas. I think of something, it's like, oh, that's a great idea, and then I get home later, it's like, what was that idea? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I find that happens for me all the time.
Sure.
I have all these ideas all the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have my phone and I have a little note thing in it, but it never occurs to me to take that out, write it down.
Yeah. I can occasionally, when I do write an idea down, and I'll get it home later, it's like, oh, this is stupid. Why'd I write this down?
Yeah.
Very rarely do those ideas actually turn out to be good ideas, but sometimes they do.
Yeah. All right. So you have written how many novels at this point?
I've published 5, and I've probably written 7.
Okay.
So 2 of the early ones were not.
And those will never see.
Probably
the page,
not.
Right?
No.
Okay. What was the first published novel?
The first published novel I wrote, and again, these are self-published. I want to make that clear that I'm not.
Well, they're available on Amazon.
Available on Amazon. Yep. But it's called The Undertaker's Hill, and
that was your first.
That was the very first one.
Okay.
But when I first wrote it, direct print publishing, self-publishing was not really available. So I was sending it out to publishers and met with, disinterest.
Yeah.
But I had it in a loose leaf binder at the time, or a couple. I had a couple copies, and people asked me to read them, and they ended up getting passed around to the point where they went to people I didn't even know, and I had people coming up to me. This was back in the late 90s.
It was just like people photocopying it and handing it off, or just the same binder?
The same binder.
Oh, wow.
There were I think there were 3 of them circulating.
Pages then at that point.
They were getting beat up. But I had people coming up to me and saying, "Oh, I read your book," and I was like, "Oh, how'd you read my book?" It's like so and so passed it off to me, and it's like oh, so
wow.
So I finally decided, it's like there's some interest in this, even if it's not. And so I've sold a fair number of copies that way. It's and I don't really have to answer to an editor this way, which is good and bad. But I proofread as best I can. I have someone else proofread it for me, but it's not the same level of of copy editing that you might want. It's like, as soon as the best way to find the mistakes in your manuscript is put it in print. It's like, suddenly they're there they all are. Where were they hiding?
Right. Yeah. What's been your experience because you've self-published a few different things now, the availability or the readily accessibility of the on-demand, not just the printing, but also like the e-readers, like a Kindle or whatever. How has that changed your experience as a writer or somebody seeking publication? Because now, I mean, everything is available to just about anybody now. How do you make sure that people can find your stuff? Or, what's that experience been like?
It's not marketing has not been my forte.
Yeah.
So I do it on social media.
Yeah.
And, and like I said, I've got a fairly loyal readership but it's not a huge readership. It's people who like it, seem to really like it, and but getting beyond that and spreading it out into the larger world, I have not figured that out.
We'll figure that out together with this. So what was after you published The Undertaker's Hill?
Yes.
How long before you went back and published the next one?
It was almost 14 years later.
Was that just for the follow-up for that book?
That was the follow-up. There were 3 books that ended up being in that series. The Undertaker's Hill, Nothing Stays Buried Forever, and then Relax, The Illuminati Have Everything Under Control is the 3rd book in the series.
Yeah.
And there was a 14-year gap between the first and the second book. And
you didn't publish anything else in that time?
No.
Wow.
Well, I didn't publish Undertaker's Hill until very close to the time that the next one came out.
Oh, I see.
But the time of writing them was a 14-year gap. And people asked almost right away. It's like, well, what happens next? And I tried a couple times to write an immediate sequel.
Right.
But I didn't have an idea. It wasn't until 14 years later where it popped into my head. It's like, oh, here's what happens next.
Interesting.
And the 14-year gap actually proved useful.
Yeah.
Because somebody goes to investigate the events of the first book, 14 years later. So
Okay.
there's a sort of a mystery involved in the very first book. Somebody ends up vanishing at the end of the first book.
Sure.
And 14 years later, somebody goes and looks for the guy who went missing.
All right.
Yeah, and so that was then it turned into a detective book, which the first book was not. It was more of a conspiracy thriller. The second book was, I decided to try to write it as a hard-boiled detective book, where they're investigating this thing that leads into something else. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got a series. Was it 4 total books that you've written about the Illuminati, or is it 3?
Three total books that are in Illuminati, and I've written 2 other books that are standalones that are not involved in that series.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is it about the Illuminati that drew you into writing about that?
Well, I've given a lot of thought to what's exciting about the Illuminati, and I think because the idea is nonsensical at its core. The idea that there's some secret cabal that's ruling everything.
So asking you if it's a real organization or not is kind of a dead end question.
I don't believe it's a real organization. I don't believe there is an Illuminati, and I think it's not that we fear that. I think it's actually a comforting thought. I think it's a fantasy that people find comforting, that somebody's at the wheel.
Yeah.
We might not know who it is. It might be a secret group above us.
Right.
But somebody's got their hand on the wheel and they're guiding things.
Right.
And I think in real life that's not true. I think we're adrift and things are random.
Sure.
And what's horrifying about a story about the Illuminati is that someone's peeled back the layer and you get to see the man behind the curtain, or they get a glimpse of.
Right.
And that's what's scary. It's like, oh, I'm seeing the inner workings. I shouldn't be seeing this. And now that I have seen it, my life is irrevocably changed.
Yeah.
So.
As someone writing about that kind of thing, does it scare you as you're peeling those layers away? Is it something that you find yourself reflecting about, or is it just an interesting exercise?
Well, yeah. When I'm writing it, I get really into it. Yeah. If I'm not scaring myself a little bit, I'm not going to scare anyone else.
Sure.
With the idea of it, but you have to try to make it real because, like I said, I find the concept. If you applied it to real life, the idea of an Illuminati, I find it nonsensical. It seems very unlikely. But when you're writing it, you have to make it convincing in that world.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people who write about an Illuminati go wrong. And I think it's one of the
they try to make it too realistic. They try to convince you that it's.
Well, I think they. Well, we talked earlier a little bit about Dan Brown's books,
right? And
they're his Illuminati-ish groups are so Byzantine and silly that I find his books to be.
Well, he also tried to pass it off initially as sort of more of a historical fiction, like here's what may actually have happened, rather than just here's a fictional world in which I'm telling a story.
Right.
So your way of going about it is just entirely fiction, and just here's an enjoyable story that will scare you, make you think a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think too often writers try to explain the Illuminati too much, and I think it's much more interesting that it can't be explained. It can't be fully uncovered.
Okay.
And as soon as you fully uncover it, you expose how ridiculous the whole idea is.
Right. If you ever hold a secret to one person, you know that it's impossible to keep.
Right.
For an organization that large.
Right. So in my books, you never get to the end of it. You never like, oh, here's the guy in charge. You never meet.
Yeah.
You get a glimpse of there's something going on, but it can't be. If it was really an organization that could control events like that, then getting to that person shouldn't be possible. There was a movie. It was one of the early Tomb Raider movies with
Nicolas Cage.
No, Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider with Laura Croft.
Yeah, I was thinking National Treasure for a minute.
Right. Yeah, Angelina Jolie. Yeah. And in one of them, her enemy was the Illuminati.
Okay.
And early in the movie, she shows up at the Illuminati headquarters and shoves a knife into their chair to send them a message. It's like, what kind of Illuminati could she find that quickly? It's like, that's a terrible Illuminati. That's the worst fictional Illuminati I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And it was just very silly. You know? So it's just like, now it deflated all their power. But if they can just vanish into the shadows, and you can never find them. You know?
Now, what about because you wrote The Undertaker's Hill, and then just left that world for 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything? Because I assume because of that space, you didn't set out to write a trilogy, which seems to be a very popular thing to do these days. Everything's written in trilogies now.
Right.
But you had written a standalone story.
Yes.
Completed it in your head.
Mm-hmm.
You had said goodbye to that world.
Yep.
And 14 years later, picked it up again.
Yeah.
Was there anything specifically about revisiting that world that was a challenge for you that you had to overcome to get back into the same creative headspace, to be able to visit those characters, that world again after such a long time?
Yeah, absolutely. And the world had changed, too. I wrote it pre-9/11, so the world had changed in some ways after that, the first book. And
are these set present time?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
They're all set present time. And 14 years had passed for the characters also.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it was dealing with the fallout for some of the minor characters in the first book, like how their lives had changed. The main character sort of goes away after the first book.
Okay.
I don't want to say too much more than that.
Yeah, don't spoil it.
But some of the minor characters are left in the wake of that. The horrible things have happened to them. They've gotten a little glimpse of what's going on too.
Sure.
And how has it affected their lives?
Yeah.
And now when it's all being dredged up again 14 years later, and the Illuminati has every interest in squashing anyone dredging up the events of the first book.
Yeah.
So suddenly forces are aligned against them.
Yeah,
and they're ordinary people, and they can't comprehend what's happening.
So in that span, though, I mean, life goes on for those characters,
right.
whether you're writing it or not
right.
at the time.
Yep.
So I would imagine that there's got to be a little bit of difficulty in just kind of picking up those lives again.
Yeah.
What is it like going back to those characters? I mean, separate from the Illuminati thing, like just seeing those characters again and having to fill in that 14 years of life.
Right. Well, one of the characters was from the first book was a fairly minor character. She was a 19-year-old girl in the first book, and in the second book, she's a 30-something single mom.
Oh wow!
And so, and having lived through some of those events and not having, sort of trying to put them in the background, and suddenly, now someone's showing up asking about it again.
Yeah.
All these years later, and I don't want to be involved in this.
Yeah.
This was scary the last time. I don't want to.
Right.
Yeah. So that was actually kind of fun. It's like, well, what would have happened to these people? And that's thinking about where their lives would have gone.
Yeah. Did you get any feedback from your loyal readers that had initially seen that the first 3-ring binder version of the first book, and then saw these evolved versions of the characters come back? What was the response like from that?
I think it was pretty good.
Yeah.
Because enough so that I felt like I should write a third one.
Yeah.
After that, I think I got a pretty good response from the second book.
Was there another time gap between books 2 and 3?
No,
picked right up.
2 and 3, the story kept going for me. It's like, all right, now I know what.
Yeah.
It was further fallout. It was like these minor characters kept interesting me.
Okay.
There was one guy in the second book who wasn't even planned to be anybody except for a functionary character, and for some reason, he became more interesting than I thought he was going to be. He was a small-time drug dealer in a small town, and they needed to interact with briefly. But for some reason, he became much more interesting and ended up being elevated to more of a starring role in the third book. So it's like, wow, where'd this guy come from?
Kind of like a Jesse Pinkman kind of character.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
So outside of the Illuminati books, you've also written, I have the titles correct, The Starkweather Curse?
Yes.
Which was like a supernatural thriller, is that right?
Supernatural thriller, and set right here in Westerly and in the Watch Hill area.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Fictional versions of them.
Okay.
But I always thought the inspiration for that was Napa Tree Point down in Watch Hill. At the end of Napa Tree Point is an old fort, one of those turn of the 20th century forts that was abandoned, and just a really creepy place. And I was like, wow, this would be a great setting for a horror novel.
Yeah.
So yep. So that one.
And Killer Cop Killer is the other one?
Killer Cop Killer is a revenge fantasy I wrote inspired by the Black Lives Matter incidents where people were being,
So that seems like a socially relevant sort of book. What
is.
Was it that made you decide to tackle that sort of topic?
The anger at seeing video after video of young black men being murdered by cops. And again, I don't want to trash police officers because the vast majority of them are good people doing a good job. But then there are these aberrant behavior among some, and because of the way the legal system's set up, they aren't being punished for it.
Right.
And so, my anger at that turned into I could write a revenge fantasy of some sort about this. It's like, what if somebody, these people who faced no consequences, what if somebody decided to vigilante justice sort of thing, and it went to interesting places because it's like, I don't want to give it away, but it's like ultimately is vigilante justice satisfying, and does it actually do it? Would it do any good? And that's left up. It's probably not. I'm thinking in real life, revenge probably isn't the best.
Was there anything socially that you were trying to convey through the story, or was it just strictly what would happen? What would happen
if? What would happen if somebody went to get revenge for these sorts of things?
Okay.
And it's a very pulpy crime novel.
All right.
And I had a lot of fun actually writing it. And, But there's a lot of and there's an element of humor in it too. If to be honest, there's like just how awful some people are. It almost goes over into a comical area.
Okay. Just kind of an over the top.
Yeah. So I had a lot of fun writing it.
Okay. And all of your novels are available on Amazon.
They're all available on Amazon, and they're also available. Print copies are available on Lulu.com.
Oh, okay.
www.lulu.com. That's the company that prints the books.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have also written several plays.
Quite a few plays.
Yeah.
I would say I'm more of a playwright than I am a novelist.
Okay.
Actually.
And I know that you have at least 3 collections, right? Is it
three collections that I put together myself, and I've got a play that's actually published. Most of my plays would not be appropriate for children.
Okay.
But years ago, one of my actors asked me. She said she had a small child at the time, and she acted in a lot of my plays. And she's like, "Will you please write something that I can bring my kid to?"
Yeah.
So I took it as a challenge because most of my stuff, like I said, not appropriate for children.
Sure.
So I was like, all right, what could I write? Could I write something family friendly? Can I do that? Is that in me? So I wrote a play called Persephone Rules. It's published by Brooklyn Publishers, but when I wrote it, it's based on Greek mythology, and it's a comedy. It's a very, very broad comedy with all the Greek gods and such. And for some reason that we put it on in New London at a place called the Secret Theater back in 99, I want to say.
Okay.
99, 2000. And people brought their kids to it, and the kids really, really responded to it. They sat right up in the front row. It was very informal theater, but they sat on the floor in front of the stage because it was a very low stage, and they were fascinated by it. And somebody said, you should publish this for the high school market. High school kids would be really... And so I never even knew there was a high school market at that point. So I researched it, sent it off, and lo and behold, it got published. That's my most produced play. It's been produced all over the country at various high schools. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so that's...
Now, I noticed that you have, in your bio, there's a mention of a young adult. Is it a collection of young adult plays now, or is it just that one?
Just that one that's still in print. I had another. I wrote another Greek mythology play for kids, and that one was not as successful. It was produced once, in Germany of all places, which was odd.
Oh, wow.
Because you get your royalty statements. It tells you where it was produced at a military high school in Wiesbaden, if I'm saying that right,
wow.
Germany. It was like that's the only time it was ever produced.
Oh wow!
I didn't, obviously I didn't get to go see it or anything like that. But
interesting.
But it was kind of funny. But that's out of print now. But the other one's still in print. And
okay.
Still gets done.
And your other collections are sort of by genre, is that right?
More or less by genre, yes.
Yeah.
These are all plays that I had either produced myself or had some level of success somewhere in the world. Like they got produced somewhere, they got
so they've all been
somewhere.
Staged, workshopped at least.
Yes, exactly.
Least okay.
And they're the things. I got to a point where I have sent these everywhere they're going to go, and I just want to archive them. I don't feel like people are going to buy a collection of plays. Most likely, that's more for me.
Yeah.
So they're saved and out in the world.
Right.
I'm sort of done with those plays now. I'm writing new plays. And,
okay.
Yeah.
So you're always writing plays and stuff at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of material do you like to work with when it comes to writing for the stage?
I write such a variety of things. That's one of the things I like about being a writer is that I don't get stuck doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
And if there's any good thing about not having been wildly successful is that no one is pressuring me to write the same thing again. Write that thing that was successful. Write that over and over again for the rest of your life.
Right.
So I don't have to do that. I can write anything I want, anything that strikes my fancy. I can put out there.
Yeah.
So I've written comedies, dramas. Some of them are in the realm of realism. Some of them are fantastical. They're all very, very different from one another.
Is there? Because you mentioned Persephone Rules.
Mm-hmm.
The Greek tragedies, the classic Greek stuff. People are still using those as inspiration today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What is it for you about that period that continues to inspire people to use it as source material now, writing new stuff, and why is that still such a mainstay in culture now?
I discovered Greek mythology as a child. I read Edith Hamilton's Mythology, that famous book that every parent, I think, had on their shelves somewhere. And to me, they were like ancient superheroes.
Yeah.
They, again, I loved comic books as a kid, and the Olympians were superheroes. They all had powers. They all had their own personalities. They fought with each other. They had adventures. They were just like superheroes.
Some of them even had secret identities.
Yep, exactly. They very frequently had secret identities, and so they're a lot of fun. They were the mass entertainment of their day, and even though they were a religion, they were also the mass entertainment of the time, and they hold up. They're still fun to write about, and they're recognizable in some way.
The themes that are dealt with, those are still relevant today?
Well, they're all the same themes we're dealing with now. Every theme in the world is somewhere in Greek mythology. So,
right.
Yeah. So, and I haven't really continued. I haven't written a lot more Greek mythology plays. That was the main one, and I went on to other things after that.
Yeah. No, I'm just curious because it seems like everybody tackles
Greek mythology at some point.
At some point, it touches everybody's work, and it's very interesting to me that so many centuries later, that it's still something that is relevant socially, it's relevant artistically, creatively, and it touches not just plays, but every form of media you can really think of at this point.
Yeah. Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, right? It's just popular entertainment based on Greek mythology in some way.
Yeah.
And then by writing in it, you've become part of that tradition in some small way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you set out to tackle a specific project, do you have a process that you follow just as a template kind of thing? You're going to be doing it in a certain way,
To a degree.
Okay.
There's two types of writers I found. There's outliners and non-outliners.
Yeah.
And I'm a non-outliner. I'm firmly a non-outliner.
Okay.
If I tried to write an outline, I would never write the play because I would have used all the creative energy writing the outline.
Yeah.
So, to me, I have to take one step at a time and then, all right, well, now what happens? Tell myself a story. And people like Stephen King is famously a non-outliner.
Yeah.
You know,
It's gotten him into trouble.
Sometimes it does. And it's sometimes gotten me into trouble. Sometimes you get X number of pages in and you realize this isn't working at all, and you have got to go figure out where did I take the wrong turn, and then you have to go back and
Right.
you know and fix it and take the other turn when you figure out that you have made a mistake.
Yeah.
And you can devote a lot of time to going down the wrong path. But
do you tend to write in a linear manner, like
Yeah.
you're telling your story from the
Yes.
beginning to the end?
Yes.
And so since you're not outlining, how often do you have to go back and realize, the story's going in a direction that maybe I didn't set up properly initially?
Less often lately.
Okay.
When I wrote The Undertaker Still, I definitely took wrong turns with that. Sometimes they were at the very beginning, and sometimes I had the wrong main character. It was the first time I tried to write it. It was like, oh, this character doesn't interest me.
Yeah.
I don't understand this fellow. I had to go back and start again. Like, let's redo the main character.
So telling the whole story from a different character's perspective all over again.
Right, exactly.
Oh, wow.
More or less,
Yeah.
And one time I had an antagonist, a character who was important to the story, become crazier and weirder than I needed that character to be, and it took the story down a weird path, and it's like, this isn't where the story should go, and I'm going to hit a dead end very quickly. And I have to pull it back and realign this character and make her different, and make her so that she's a little more sympathetic and we can follow her and understand why these characters are together in some way. And so,
how does something like that impact your creative flow? Because, like, to me, as someone who has never gotten past chapter 1 of any novel I've attempted, the second I get that block, or I realize this isn't going the direction I wanted it to, I don't have a mechanism within me to go back and correct it and drive forward. So how do you find that in your creative flow to be able to make that correction and continue the story?
Go on long walks and think about it.
Yeah.
It sounds trite, but that's exactly what I do. And in the past, I've been with, have had romantic partners, girlfriends and such, that didn't understand that a big part of being a writer is thinking about writing. It's not all sitting there typing. A huge part of it is daydreaming.
Yeah.
And it looks to the outside observer like you're not doing anything.
Right.
But it's actually very, very important. My wife now, one of the things I love about her is that she understands that I'm not doing nothing, I'm daydreaming, and it's important.
Yeah. You've been staring at the wall for the last 6 hours.
Right.
How many books have you written?
Wow. And I'm fairly prolific, so it works. But if you don't allow yourself the time to daydream and imagine the different possibilities, different threads, ways it could go, it's like alternate universes. You can't be stuck in the one universe if you're a writer. You've got to be able to imagine multiple ways it could go and pick the right one.
Sure.
So that's
now writing for the stage and writing a novel. I mean, it's all using words and a page and in a way, but they're very different media.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there how different is that for you creatively to write those things? Can you do one while you're doing another, or do you have to be completely separate from that?
They have to be completely separate.
Yeah,
and I find playwriting much easier. Not that it's easy, but much easier than writing a book.
Okay.
Because the thing that comes easiest for me is dialogue, and plays are mostly dialogue.
Yeah.
And the thing that I dislike most about writing prose is the descriptions of the actions and the setting.
Okay.
It's like, that's sort of like, all right, I've got to do that, and you've got to know where you are and what's happening and what they look like and all that, but that's not my favorite part to write. My favorite part to write is people talking to each other, people communicating and trying to get what they want through their words or actions.
Yeah.
And that's what I find interesting. That's why I like writing plays. That's the thing that really that flows the easiest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you get from either of those two different projects or two different types of projects, do you get more satisfaction out of one than from the other?
Yeah, I love my novels, and I think I'm very happy with them, but and they sit there on the shelves, but a play, you get to sit there in an audience and watch it with the people that are watching it, and get to watch them enjoying it, and that's so much more satisfying than with a novel. Somebody comes back, months later, years later. Hey, I read your book. It was good.
Right.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is great. I'm happy they did.
Yeah.
But people tend not to like it if you sit over their shoulder while they're reading your book. And hey, you like that part? How's that?
Right.
Is that good?
So it's kind of the same. Is that sort of the experience you have when you're watching a play that you've written? It's kind of like you're over the shoulder of...
Absolutely. Yeah. You can, and especially with a comedy, it's like if it works because are they laughing? If they're laughing, it's working.
Do you find writing a comedy more challenging than writing a drama?
No, I find writing dramas more challenging.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think I'm funny.
Okay. Well, to be fair, everybody thinks they're
Everybody
funny.
thinks they're funny, exactly. But I think I have some proof because, again, I've written a lot of comedies and I've sat in audiences and heard laughter. So and that's I have to dampen that down if I'm writing a drama. It's like, oh, don't make this too funny because now I'm gonna take away from the drama if I make this too funny.
Yeah.
I mean, every drama needs some comic relief, but I tend to skew like, oh, what would be funny here, and so as opposed to what would be effective here. So it's like, all right, think about. So.
How involved are you in the process of putting on a play that you've written?
I used to be very involved when I started off. I directed all my own plays because no one else would, because I was completely unknown. But I don't feel like I can direct plays, but I don't feel like it's my favorite place to be. Directing plays is not. I love actors, but I don't know if I'm great at directing them and interacting with them in that way. I have actors who are my muses. There's a number of people who over the years, like, there's a fellow named Michael Vernon Davis who's a local actor, and gosh, every male role is practically for him.
Okay.
It's like this guy. It's just something about him. It's like, oh, he's captivating on stage. And, and there's a number of other actors who have been like that over the years too. And sometimes they move away, and I can't write for them anymore. Right. But now my favorite thing to do is to take the script and hand it to a director and say, I'll see you on opening night. Okay. And if you can trust your director, you can do that.
Yeah.
I had one full-length play produced in New York City, 2012, and that was the exact thing that happened. I handed the script to the director, and I showed up on opening night, and she had captured exactly what I wanted. I was like, she got it. It was on the page, therefore she was able to put it on the stage, and she did it the way I wanted, and I was just thrilled.
Have you ever had sort of the opposite, where you had a very specific image in your mind of how your play would look, and then when you got to opening night, you enjoyed it, but it was very much not what you thought it was going to be?
I have not had that experience
No,
yet.
okay.
No. And I guess I've been very lucky because I hear other playwrights talk about that happening all the time. It's like, oh, that they didn't understand my play, they did it wrong, or and I have not, but I've also trusted my directors. I've had the conversation with the directors so that I know that they get. Cato McNichol, who we've mentioned earlier, she's a local director and playwright, and she's directed my work before, and she gets it. She understands what I'm going for, and she's able to. She doesn't always do it exactly the way I would have done it, but it's usually better than what I would have. Like, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's even better than what I imagined. So, I've had very good experiences with that so far.
Yeah. Have you ever been involved in the production and had to resist the urge to rewrite during like as the show is getting ready to go up? Do you ever find?
If I do rewrite, it's minor stuff, because if I'm involved in the production as the director, then I've got my director's hat on, and I'm thinking about how to take the script that's in front of me and present it most clearly.
Sure.
And occasionally I'll do little tweaks, but mostly the play is ready by that point.
Yeah.
And do I sometimes after the show say, oh, I know how I can make this better now? Absolutely, and I have done that. But that's what there's a whole development process you go through. You know, when I first finish a play, the very first step is I invite actors into my living room, and we do a sit-down reading, and we listen to it, and I get feedback from them. And then I might do a reading in front of a small audience, get some feedback. Do a staged reading with some costumes, still the script in hand. It's like, okay, and then you tweak it some more. So by the time it gets to an actual production, it's had some development work.
Right.
It's like, oh, this part doesn't work, this goes away.
Right.
And time also is a big element. It's like when you first write a play, you're in love with it, and every word is perfect, and then you can't really look at it clearly for a year sometimes. It's like you look at it, it's like somebody else's play, and you can tear it apart, and it's like I'm not emotionally invested as much anymore. Right. It's like, oh, God, this is terrible.
You got to be able to look at your own stuff with fresh eyes.
Absolutely.
You set it aside for a long time.
Yeah, and you have to set it aside. You have to. It's got to. As soon as I finish a play, even before I invite actors in the room, I put it aside for several months before, and then go back and look at it again before I invite people over to my house.
Did you have to learn that? Like, did you rush something in at some point?
Yeah.
What was that
the very
like?
First play I ever wrote, and I would never put it on today, but I was in a theater group. This is back in the early 90s. I was in a theater group, and it was run by a director-playwright who had also been one of my high school teachers. And I saw his plays, and I thought to myself, I can do that. Yeah. He was influential. It's like he just writes his plays, and people put them on. I can do that. So I started writing a play, and I was having trouble finishing it because it was my very first one. So to force myself to finish it, I went into a meeting of the theater group and said, I have finished a play, and I'll show it to you next week. They were like, oh, great, we look forward to it. So next week, I was like, I got to finish this play now because I'm going to look like a fool if I don't finish it. And I did finish it, and we put it on, and it wasn't terrible. I mean, people sort of enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It was, but, I can clearly see everything that's wrong with it today.
Sure,
but, I'm going to... But at the same time, it got me going. It's like, all right, I finished a play and I put it on, so it happened. So, and it got the ball rolling. But today I would never, unless it was one of those. We do a lot of these Mayfly 24-hour play things. You've probably heard about at this point. Those are fun because obviously no time to rewrite. You write overnight, and it's like it's going up tomorrow. Yeah, those are fun too because they're raw and new.
So, do you have anything currently that you're working on?
Got a number of plays. Last year was a very productive year. I think I wrote 5 full-length plays last year.
Oh, wow.
It was just a lot. But I was just on a roll, and they're all very different from each other. I just had a good year for writing. I don't know what. some years you write very little, and last year was a big year.
Was there a through line through all of it, or are they all completely
all different? It's just like they're all different plays about different things, and so I was having actors in my living room frequently recently, and so now I'm trying to figure out which one I want to really commit to and put a production up maybe next year, and I'm sending them out to developmental theaters and theaters around. That's a big part of the job is sending the plays out to theaters and
Well, you have to keep us posted on that one.
I certainly will. Certainly will.
So we can come out and see it.
Yeah.
All right. So at this point, I think it's probably time to get to the little fun segments at the end. So right. I have put you front row center for a minute and give you some rapid fire questions. Your favorite author?
Bukowski.
Oh yeah. Good one.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. The best meal you've ever had?
The best meal I've ever had? It was probably... it was a restaurant called Calliope. It was in New York City.
Okay.
And it was right on opening night of my first full-length play in New York.
Yeah.
And it was a fantastic French restaurant. I went with my wife, one of my friends and his wife, and it was a fantastic meal.
Oh, great. Okay. Beatles or Stones?
Beatles.
Okay. Right answer. One place everyone should visit before it's too late.
Before it's too late? Oh, I don't know. New London. They should go to New London.
Okay.
It's already too late, but you should still go there. It's a weird place, and it's inspired a lot of my writing. How it's it's a horrible place, and it's a wonderful place at the same time.
Okay. Yeah. One time in your life that you have laughed the hardest.
Oh boy. I laughed the hardest I probably laughed the hardest at a Dungeons and Dragons game with my friends, because we understand each other, we talk in a shorthand, and we start going down weird roads, and we just start cracking up. It was probably at a D&D game at some point in my life. Okay. That's probably when I laughed the hardest.
Somebody cast the laughter spell, and that was the end of
exactly,
it. Yeah, All right. So last thing before we wrap up, I always like to get a recommendation. Something that you have experienced recently from anywhere, any genre, anything that you really think other people should take a look at.
So I was reading The New Yorker recently, and they had an article about a writer named Ottessa Moshfegh, and I read a couple paragraphs of the article, stopped reading the article because I said, this writer is right for me. I can tell just by these first two paragraphs of this article. Wow. And I went on Amazon and I bought everything she ever wrote. She's written 2 novels and a collection of short stories. I bought them all. Yeah. And Ottessa Moshfegh, she wrote a book called Eileen, is her first novel. She wrote a collection of short stories, and now I'm reading her book, My Year of Rest and Relaxation, and she is a fantastic young writer. She's in her 30s. She's only in her 30s at this point, and she writes like nobody else. There's weird, unlikable characters, people that you wouldn't want to encounter in real life, but she makes you fascinated by them. So she makes the protagonist of her story just unlikable. Unlikable. Yeah, the character in Eileen is a social outcast who works at a prison for young boys, and she's someone you wouldn't want to encounter in real life. Yeah. But you read about her and you understand her, and she makes the sort of the disgusting palatable in some weird way. Okay. And I absolutely love her, and she's my new favorite writer right now. I'm on a big kick for Ottessa Moshfegh. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good one. Yeah. How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. I like people leaving these conversations feeling good. Yeah. So thank you very much for agreeing to sit with me, and I enjoyed chatting with you.
My pleasure. I enjoyed chatting with you.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Michael's books are available on Amazon and also on Lulu.com. So go check those out. That's Michael R. McGuire. Don't forget the R. It's really important. There are apparently a lot of imposter Michael McGuires out there, and if you don't use the R, you may very well get duped. I appreciate you listening to the show, and I would love to see some more iTunes ratings and reviews. And, of course, you can follow the pod on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and you can always reach me at tabletostage@gmail.com. Oh, and don't forget to at least take a peek at the Patreon page. There's a lot of extra stuff on there, and some of it might be of interest to you. Until next time, keep creating.